What an honor for me to welcome you here tonight. So the question of the hour is, what are Titans? What am I welcoming you to? Well, trying to be a little scholarly for my welcome, I want you to know in Greek mythology that Titan is one of great strength, one of great influence, one of the family members that stands out as a giant. And then, as my good friend Jordan Miller says, is somebody that carries the heavy load and they're at the top of everything. So tonight, I welcome you to an hour of giants, people who do the heavy lifting, the shoulders that we stand on. Tonight is great because when you think about the Titans that we're going to honor tonight, they stand on the shoulders of maybe someone like Ken Frazier, somebody like Ken Chenault, Bob Johnson, somebody like Ursula Burns or Alexis Herman or Marion Wright Edelman or, yes, Hillary Clinton. So when we think about the men and women to come on this stage, I am so honored to know and be able to say that every one of them have touched my life. You never know when you're on a journey what bridge you're going to have to cross. You never know when you're on a journey what Titan you will meet. So tonight, to these great Titans, join me in saluting them. And along the way, when you leave this evening, look to them and say, thank you, because they have paid a heavy price. They have sacrificed. They've led the way. And to have them on this stage with my good friend, Ed Gordon. Wow. Talk about a Titan in his own right. Talk about someone who has crisscrossed this country, someone we watch on TV and we count on to get it right. Well, that's my welcome tonight. A welcome of Titans we say thank you to, a welcome of Titans who've crossed that bridge. Now, they told me to get you warmed up and to get you ready for something you're going to enjoy. So just in case you forget, I am Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I approve tonight's message. Godspeed.
Well, that's a tough act to follow, right? Thank you, Congresswoman Joyce Beatty. We appreciate you, and we appreciate, too, all the support that you have given to the Who's Who brand in this community and across the country. At this point, I'd also like to welcome our host for the evening. We're in the Convention Center, and we have a very dynamic individual coming to the stage, John Page, who is the General Manager of the Convention Center.
Good evening, everyone. How's everyone? How do you follow that, Congresswoman Beatty? You know, we were joking in the back who should go first, and I lost the bet, so okay, we'll see how we can follow that. I'll say, again, to the ones I know out in the audience and those that I don't know, I'm John Page, the General Manager, also known as your little-known Black History Fact. Here as the General Manager here at the Convention Center. So I'm going to briefly speak a little bit about the Convention Center of kind of today. The Convention Center has recently completed a $140 million expansion and renovation. So the Convention Center of old is in the rearview mirror. The Convention Center going forward is a different convention center altogether. Obviously, with me at the helm, at the leadership, but just as well, the doors are open, not just to some people's business, but everyone's business. And that's an important message to be able to get out today. So again, we're thankful for the opportunity to host you here this evening in this important dialogue that's going to occur. I thank Ernie and Carter both for their friendship and partnership. Enjoy the conversation, and again, I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Again, I also want to bring you greetings tonight on behalf of our CEO, Hiram Jackson, who's traveling. I want to tell you just a little bit about our company, Real Times Media. First of all, Real Times Media is a multimedia corporation. We are the nation's largest African-American owned and operated news organization. Our headquarters is in Detroit, Michigan, and also under that umbrella, we own many of the black newspapers across the country. Examples of that would be the Michigan Chronicle, the New Pittsburgh Courier, the Atlanta Daily World, and the Chicago Defender. So also, and a lot of those papers have rich, long history, and some of you know that, and we're proud to have those as part of the Real Times Media family. Also, a part of the brand, if you will, of Real Times Media is the Who's Who product. And most of you are most familiar with that because you're very familiar with the Who's Who in Black Columbus publication and unveiling ceremony that we do annually here in Columbus. One thing that you might not know is, even I have to say this to myself, the edition coming out this year, which will be sometime around the first of the year, will be the 15th edition of Who's Who in Black Columbus. I think Columbus deserves it. 15th edition. And some of you also know that we're doing these publications in over 25 other cities across the United States. I just came back from Charlotte this past Monday, where we released Who's Who in Black Charlotte. Who's Who in Black Atlanta came out 3 weeks ago, and 2 weeks from now, Who's Who in Black Houston. So the company continues to grow, and I think Columbus should be proud that a lot of this started in our city. This started here and has built out into all these other organizations. So we are really pleased with that. Tonight's discussion, you should know, is a national discussion. We have had the Titans program in Detroit, Houston, Charlotte, Atlanta, Newark/New York, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. So we need to continue to have this discussion, and that's why we keep the audience an intimate audience. This is not our typical, this was an invitation-only event, small so we can have real conversation with the Titans that you all will see this evening on stage. One of the things we should always do is thank those organizations who sponsored tonight and made it happen. You can hold your applause while I mention them all, and we'll give them a resounding applause. Nationwide, AEP Ohio, UPS, and Columbus State Community College. Let's give them all a strong round of applause. Okay, so now we're going to get started. So one of my jobs this evening is to have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for the evening. Some of you know that Ed Gordon is an Emmy Award-winning journalist known for his stellar interaction with newsmakers from politics, entertainment, and sports. Gordon's no-nonsense style makes him one of television and radio's most respected journalists. Over the span of his career, Ed has worked with conglomerates like CBS, 60 Minutes, NBC's Today Show, and also Dateline. His diverse style also makes him one of the most versatile people in broadcasting. He recently launched his new TV magazine show on Bounce TV, and some of you may know that Bounce TV is one of the fastest growing African-American networks in the country. So please help me give a warm Columbus welcome to Ed Gordon.
Good evening. How you guys doing? For those of you from Columbus, I'm related to the Troys. If they owe you any money, I'm not a part of it. Let me just say that we have had some really spirited discussions in all of those cities that Ernie mentioned, and I hope to duplicate and replicate that tonight. What we try to do as best we can is kind of peel the onion back. A lot of times we come to these things and you will hear some cliches tonight, because when we talk generalities, you speak in cliches, but we try to go down below that line as well. Many of you are in different stages. Some of you have come here for just sheer support. Some of you have come here because you're kind of bumping your head against a particular ceiling and you can't go to that next level. Some of you are just starting out. So everybody has kind of a different chapter where they sit. So we're going to take all questions. I would just ask, and we're going to get to the questions earlier than later, that you involve yourself on the early side, because inevitably, and I've been doing this for almost 30 years, people get mad because they're shy in the beginning. Then we run out of time and we don't get to your question, and then you're mad at me. I will get over that, but let's try to get you involved as soon as possible. The other part of it is let us try to keep our questions concise and quick, because that is my other job as moderator, to keep you on track. We can talk about Omarosa after this. So, yeah. Y'all notice you ain't seen her after that, right? All right. Let us move to our program. But before we get to the program, we want to show you just a little video.
You can't see a panel like this and not walk away inspired.
This was really an opportunity for exchange, networking, hearing from some of the giants.
We've had these kinds of conversations for decades now. It's kind of now time to peel back the onion and get beyond the first level of rhetoric.
Right now, when you look at the population, the Caucasian population is declining. The African American, Hispanic, and Asian populations are increasing. And so one of these days, you all, and it's in a very, very near future, we're going to be running things. And so we need to be prepared.
If you took the entire wealth of every African American in this country and the top 1% of whites in this country, they would still far exceed the wealth of the entire African American community. So when you talk about that kind of gap, and I throw this out to all of you, how can we begin to chip away at that? Because that's not the kind of money people want to share.
I didn't stutter. You want to have a real meeting? You want to just BS all night?
The ability to transfer what we build today to the next generation and the next generation, that's something that is lacking in our community. There are very few businesses that I know of that have generational, they're able to transfer. You know, we want our children to achieve their dreams and have their own dreams, but I think it's important that they see the value of what their parents built.
All right. So let us get to tonight's panel. And as you can see, you will be videotaped. So if you're here with somebody you shouldn't be, I suggest you move a couple of seats over. All right. First, let me introduce Dwight Smith. He's the founder, chief executive officer, and president of Sophisticated Systems Incorporated. Smith has more than 35 years of experience in the IT industry. Sophisticated Systems provides businesses with a comprehensive set of information technology solutions to drive results, from professionals and products to management services. Please welcome Dwight Smith. Next, the Honorable Charlita Tavares. She was sworn in on January 5th of 2015 for her second term as state senator for Ohio's 15th district and Senate Assistant Minority Leader. Tavares is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Primary One Health, a federally qualified primary health care system with 11 sites in Central Ohio that provide access services to services that improve the health statuses of families, including financial, social, or cultural barriers to health care. Please welcome Senator Charlita Tavares. This next gentleman gave us the profound words on the video. You want to BS or you want to talk about something? Please welcome Dr. William F. Picard. Bill is the chairman of Global Automotive Alliances, LLC. He has a 30-year background as an entrepreneur. He focuses on innovative business development, team building, and long-term strategic planning in his various enterprises. He is also the author of Millionaire Moves, 7 Proven Principles. Please welcome Bill Picard. Next, Mary Parker. Mary is President and Chief Executive Officer of All-in-One Security Services Incorporated. After more than 30 years of navigating a boundary-breaking career in one of the most challenging industries for women, Mary now touts a thriving multi-million-dollar security enterprise with a workforce of more than 200 employees. She is also the author of the book, The Chick in Charge. Please welcome Mary Parker. Next, Alex Shoemate. He is Managing Partner, North American Squire Patton Boggs, U.S. LLP. As Managing Partner, North America, Shoemate provides strategic and operational guidance in pursuing new business opportunities regionally, nationally, and internationally, and in addressing issues arising from the firm's 17 offices across the United States. Please welcome Alex Shoemate. And lastly, please welcome Stephen A. Davis. He's a former chairman and chief executive officer of Bob Evans Farms Incorporated. Mr. Davis is versatile and growth-oriented chief executive board of directors and general business strategies experienced in publicly trading restaurants, retail and consumer packages, and good companies, Bob Evans Farms Incorporated, PepsiCo, Yum Brands, and Kraft, just to name a few. Please welcome Stephen Davis. You heard me talk about the tremendous wealth gap that exists between white families and black, and that was extraordinary to me when I was told that. Initially, I did not believe it. I couldn't believe that the top 1% of wealth would eclipse all of our wealth. And then I did a little research, and that, in fact, is the case. And so when you just stop and think about that, that's an extraordinary number. And when you just talk about the average family, the wealth gap in terms of what a white family has in savings and in the bank in comparison to black and Latino families is extraordinary. So what I'd like to do is just talk about, if we could, just across the board, kind of where we sit today and what each of you thinks has to be done to not only just close the gap, but as I have suggested in many fronts, change our narrative. We've been sitting in this same spot for a long time. So if we can just quickly go and get your thoughts on that, how we change the narrative, I'd appreciate that, and we'll get into it. And lastly, again, please be thinking about, we're going to have some roving mics. We'll be coming to you sooner than later. So I'll throw that out to anybody who wants to take it first.
We're all looking at one another. I know many of the folks, this is not a shy group, so I think a couple things are happening. First of all, there is, as we all know, an income difference. As African Americans, we are not earning what white Americans are. When you couple that with the fact that the earning or the income coming in is less, and then we have been excluded or do not have the exposure to invest in certain asset classes which carry higher risk and higher rewards, that creates an even larger gap. So I look forward to the day where not only we are earning more, but we're investing in things like private equity and mergers and acquisitions and things like that, that traditionally people that look like you and I were not in the room when those discussions are being had, and we're not in the room when those checks are being written. And the upside is fairly significant.
I guess I would start pretty basic with our young people, that we have to start them with financial literacy. We have to make sure that they understand the value of a dollar and the importance of saving out of that dollar. Starting early and taking that young person to the bank or to the credit union with us so that they see for every dollar that they earn, a portion of it must go into some kind of investment.
Well, you know, I never thought about this, and I heard you say it several times. But quickly, if we could take 100 millionaires who are black in 1950. In 1950, that's only, what, 60 or 70 years ago? I think the real tragedy is that those families that had $1 million net worth in 1950, I guarantee you today, only about 30 or 40% still have that status. We're going the wrong way. And that's related to a number of things, but I think that's a profound question, and it's something that the academicians should take a look at it. And I'm suggesting that in 1950, we had a higher percentage of black millionaires then than we have today because they made their money out of the black communities, and those communities are gone to I-75 and I-85 and what have you. And if we look at their families today, they have lost that economic clout.
I would also add that educating our people within our community about the value of a dollar is also very important. We look at money as something that's tangible for right now and not ever thinking about the legacy of wealth building. And as Senator said, once we began with another generation, raising other generations to understand what wealth building is, then I believe is when we will have a change, but not until the understanding of that is very clear.
I would certainly agree with everything that's been said, and certainly from my perspective, we really need a mindset change, that we think in terms of getting good jobs. We think in terms of our day job. But we all know that if you really want to seek wealth, you have to make money when you're sleeping.
One thing I would point out is we have to think differently about how we deploy our assets. And what I mean by that is early in your lives, you have choices. You have places where you can place your money. And as long as we put our money in depreciable assets, we're not going to get out of this. Because when we were talking about who's getting wealthy, if you take a car, brand new car, the average car's value drops by what? We all probably know the answer in this room. What is the average value that a car, I hope nobody, does anybody in here work for GM? So I'm gonna get myself in trouble, or any automotive industry. What is the average percentage decline of any automobile once you drive it off the lot? What'd you say? It can be up to 50% if it's a luxury car. So if you want that luxury car, that's okay. But buy it 2 or 3 years later, because how many people say, oh, that's a cool Mercedes, but that's 2 years old? Nobody should care. But sometimes those decisions you make early in life can make a huge difference. So if you take a $50,000 car and you lose 20% of its value, why not put that in a mutual fund? Why not put that in an index fund? That's what the majority is doing. I'm telling you, it's not as complicated as it may look. I know a lot of people look up and say, oh, I can never get there, I can never do that. If you think differently about how you deploy your assets, I guarantee you, you will have wealth for yourself, but you will also have wealth for the next generation. And when you teach your children, that's that third generation that we were talking about that doesn't even exist anymore.
So let me ask this, because one of the things that we try to do in some of the other cities is talk about how we get past that front line that we just talked about. So how do we do that? Because some of what we're talking about, we've been talking about. We've been talking about getting young kids involved in understanding economics as early as elementary school. We've been talking about that for more than a decade, yet we're not seeing it. We've been talking about depreciable goods, yet, and myself included, still spend more money on suits than I need to, right? Or a car than we need to, or having that fifth Sony or Samsung in the house just because we don't want to peek around the corner to see the game. We want it right in front of us in the kitchen. So how do we teach that beyond just the first line of rhetoric that we give? What are we going to have to do to move it past that?
I would like to encourage all of us to begin thinking about transferring talent. That is something we don't do in our communities either. If we don't teach our children while they're young what things to expect when they're older, and that was a perfect example that you just gave about the cars, and we can relate that, to all of the sports paraphernalia that we are allowing our kids to get in all the games. But we have to be intentional. We have to be intentional about the things we're doing and saying and acting. So I started a foundation. And my foundation is the Mary Parker Foundation, Raising Other Generations. Now, wouldn't you say that's intentional? We concentrate on education, entrepreneurial, and reentry. Those are three very, very critical areas that if we don't start the other generations, we're going to continue to lose as we are doing so. So we provide scholarships to students. We have over 30 students that are in colleges and universities. Some are attending med school, law schools, but we're intentional. And I take a great portion of my own personal funds. I'm not happy being the only wealthy person in my family or within my peers. But it's important to me to ensure that others have an opportunities that I've actually blazed the trails to enable them to do so.
From my perspective, I think that part of it is to get back to basics, Ed, that we've already alluded to it, the way we deal with debt. If all of us are honest, we've spent much too much money on credit card interest. Credit cards are the new slave owners. If we are honest, the challenge we have with dealing with credit card debt and debt in general keeps us from even thinking about wealth and investments. So part of what we need to do is what we're doing tonight, which is education. And as one of my mentors said to me, make the complex simple. Sometimes we overcomplicate things. It's about dealing with our debt, it's about learning how to save, and it's about getting a good financial advisor. If you do those three things, you will be on your way to wealth accumulation.
And so Alex makes a couple of interesting points. He was just talking about debt as leverage. And there's good leverage and there's bad leverage. So how do you leverage up your assets? His initial comment, which was right on, which is you got to figure out a way to make money while you sleep. And what I would suggest to you is it's very important if you're creating wealth to have multiple income streams. Everyone, when you start your career, the first year you do your income taxes, you look and 99% of your income is on your W-2, and you start thinking about, what about rental income? What about investment income? And then you wake up 10 years later, and 50% of your income comes from your JOB. And 10 years later, 20%. So it's not just making money when you sleep. We would not put all of our assets in one bucket. Why should we bet our financial future on one revenue stream?
And something you typically don't control either.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Senator, I know you wanted to say something, and then Bill, I want to go to you because you have really lived what he's talking about. So Senator, go ahead and then.
Yes, I just want to pick up on Mary's comments. We do have to be intentional and to start where we are. I run a nonprofit organization that is disproportionately women, single heads of households. But I wanted to make sure that they had a 403B program so that they could start investing early, as little as they needed to, in order to start building some wealth. And then to look at programs like paid family leave, because again, disproportionately, single heads of household. And then looking at long-term care, which is another area that we don't plan for. And if we don't plan for it, we will wipe out whatever wealth we've built.
Bill, I wanted you to pick up on what Mr. Smith said, because it's interesting. You have really been the personification of that to a great degree. And more specifically, I wanted to get you to talk about starting, because a lot of people feel they cannot start if they don't have X amount of money and they don't know where to go.
Thank you. Well, first of all, this is not a commercial, but it is the truth. I have the pleasure of being a student at Ohio State University in 1970 in a doctoral program. And like most students, first generation in college and all that, I didn't have money. And I received a call that I was eligible to become a McDonald's franchisee. And I went to the Ohio State Student Union, Mr. Chairman, to an alpha meeting on a Sunday afternoon, and I said to one of the brothers, I said, man, if I had $10,000, I could buy a McDonald's franchise. He said, do you know Brother John Hall over there? I said, no, I don't know him. He said, well, he works in financial aid. And this is true. I went to John Hall, met him the following Tuesday. He gave me a $10,000 loan under the Pell Grant or Student Funds, whatever it was. All I remember is this. That was 1969. If he had given me that money in 1979, I'd have bought me a long yellow convertible Cadillac. You know? But my values had changed. And I really took that money and bought McDonald's, and I've been very blessed. I was one of the first 10 black McDonald's owners in this country, and from McDonald's I went into automotive supply, and we now do over $500 million a year. And from that we went into MGM Casino, and that is the best investment I ever made other than the God that I serve. And then from that we went into real estate and Real Times Media. So that diversity of income has been very strategic in my life. But I must say, I went to school to be a social worker. And people always say, well, how did you get in all these different business? And I say, look, man, I'm from Flint, Michigan. And if you watch the community, every hustler has a different corner to work because they all go up and down, you know.
Mr. Davis, I want to ask you about strategic partnerships, something that our community, I think, still needs to learn. You hear a lot of people. I'll share just a quick story. I've been very blessed to be around people with real money for our community. That's why I stay close to Bill Picard there. But as many of you know, I was at BET for years, and so it was around Bob Johnson a lot. And everyone would come to Bob with an idea, yet no plan. And one day we were getting on an elevator. A guy runs to the elevator. He catches the elevator, and there are only 4 of us on the elevator. And so he's out of breath, and he says, "Oh, Bob Johnson, I'm so glad I caught you, man. I got this plan. I got this plan. I can make you a lot of money." Now I'm thinking, well, Bob's a billionaire, so he don't really need a lot of money, but okay. So Bob was very gracious that day. He said, "Okay, what's your plan? Give me your elevator pitch." Literally, we're on the elevator. He said, "Well, I got this plan, man. I can make you a lot of money." He just kept saying that. I can make you. He had absolutely no plan. So we got down and getting off the elevator, I said, "Bob, give me 2 seconds." I went back to my man. I go, "Doc." So Bob said, "Here's my card. You can call me on Monday." I go, "Doc, you know he's not taking your call on Monday, right?" And I explained to him there was no plan. You weren't ready. So I thought about, we talk about partnerships a lot at conferences, and yet very few come to fruition. How important are strategic partnerships, and how do we move beyond just talking about it?
Well, first of all, it goes back to what you were saying. You have to be intentional, and you have to have a plan. I'm going to tell a quick story I was sharing with Ed earlier I was reading about a librarian who gave $5 million. Now, a librarian, you know approximately what a librarian makes, gave $5 million to her college when she passed on. $5 million. And someone was like, well, how did a librarian get to $5 million? And what she told people, what she was doing is she was going back to the library and she was studying stocks. And she invested a little at a time and kept, getting into the good stocks. So she had a plan. And it was a little at a time. So a lot of times we think we have to have all of this. Sometimes you just have to start with a plan and then make the right connections. I've been blessed. I'm in part of a group now, a group of brothers who were trying to break into private equity. You were talking about private equity. And what was happening is they would find ideas, and then they'd go out to the market, to some of the larger firms, but then guess what would happen? They'd take it over. And this happened a couple of times. And these are all smart brothers. I mean, you're talking brothers who worked at Procter & Gamble. One was the CEO of Whirlpool. You probably know who these people are. And finally, they just said, you know what, we're going to get our own money. We're going to put together our own investment vehicle, and people will come to us. And they went on a road show. And they were targeting to raise $200 million, which when I first saw that, I said, wow, that's big boy money. They oversubscribed. Why? because they believed. But they made the partnerships that you were talking about, but the partnerships started out with themselves. And the belief and the goal. And let me tell you, it was not easy. This was the better part of 24 months. And I've been blessed to be a part of it, but the thing I'm most proud of is this is a group of brothers who got together and said, let's make this happen. But those strategic partnerships came as a result of relationships that they've built over many years. And if you think about the people in this room, just look around you. Look around you in terms of the success they've achieved. And if I could give one word of advice about wealth creation and wealth management, talk amongst yourselves. How many times do you get together in some forums, and don't get mad at me, I know I'm a Wisconsin guy, we'll talk about the Buckeyes. Great topic. But while you're there, why not talk about an investment idea you had, or a partnership you created, or a group of professionals that you're trying to get to a group of young folks and teach them about wealth management. I've got a challenge to everybody in this room. How many of you in here have children? Doesn't matter what age, so most of you in this room have children. I would challenge you to say to your child, I'm going to give you $100,000, and ask them, what would they do with that $100,000? Now, if they come back with some great wealth management ideas, we've done our job. If they say, I'm going to go out and buy that sports car or whatever else, which might be the answer, then maybe we need to rethink how we help shape our children's values, because the decisions they make now, and Bill was talking about that earlier, taking that $10,000 and becoming a McDonald's franchisee. When I was in business school, I was hanging around guys who were taking student loans out and putting in money markets, because the student loan was 4 or 5%, money markets, I'm dating myself, were paying double digits. I never thought of that. I never thought of going and borrowing money, and I could have borrowed up to $20,000 and could have paid 4% and made 6%, and not paid it back for 2 years. But those ideas are out there.
I'd like to comment on that. So many great points. First of all, it's very important that we pool our money and resources. So someone will come and say, this is an opportunity, but it costs $500,000 to buy in. You say, geez, I don't have $500,000. The question is, do you have 5 friends that have $100,000? And then you set up an LLC and you go in together. I'd like to tell a quick story. There's a fund here in Columbus called OTAF, the Ohio Tech Angel Fund. And it's not a $200 million fund. 15 years ago, a group of Caucasian folks met at the New Albany Country Club. I told this publicly before. And they wanted 99 people that put $25,000 in the pot. That was it. If they could raise that money, they could get matching funds from the state of Ohio, and they could go out and do deals. They could look at deal flow. They could put $100,000 to $150,000 to $200,000 in a deal. Angel investing, right? $25,000 buy-in, 200 people at the New Albany Country Club, and I was the only African American in the room. That doesn't make any sense. And I remember someone asked me, what do you think? And I'll tell you what I told them 15 years ago is, I think there's more than one black person in Columbus who can write a check for $25,000. So we need exposure, we need excitement, and we need a willingness to write those checks and pool those resources. And that's a small part of what you said. But $25,000, we can get there.
Senator, let me ask you this before we start to open it up to the audience. One of the things that was interesting there is you talk about the state of Ohio and matching funds. One of the realities of today's world is a lot of what bolstered our community in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s is no longer there. And realistically probably is not coming back, certainly not in the sheer numbers that we knew before. How do we make sure that we are politically aware and astute when we are seeing things that we still have the chance to keep, to make sure that we fight that battle and give you and others the muscle behind you that you need? Because I just did a profile of Maxine Waters recently, and one of the things that Maxine said is it's great for them to call me Auntie Maxine and all that, but I need clout behind me, and I don't always have that. How do we make sure that we understand that dynamic?
I'm glad you asked that question. One of the ways that I've tried to reach out to my community as an African-American legislator is to share what I'm doing and how you can help. It's important to know the process. It's important to know the legislators who are trying to lift up these issues on behalf of our community. I have a vehicle, the Columbus African American News Journal, that is now in Dayton, Ohio, that is a forum for me to share what's going on in the Ohio General Assembly, to share the good, bad, and the ugly. But it's also important, as Ed said, that I have people coming to the legislature, particularly those who have the influence with many of the legislators and many of the programs in state government. These are your dollars, and if you're not there, out of sight, out of mind. They won't think about your businesses. They won't think about investing in our community because it's just Charlita on her soapbox, just like Sister Maxine Waters. They will believe that you are sharing this idea, but there's no one to back you up. There's no one clamoring for this investment in community A, B, and C. And then you've got to hold us accountable. We have 18 African American legislators in the Ohio General Assembly. Not everyone is lifting up and doing their part to ensure that our community gets its fair share. What's fair, what's just, what's right, and what is equitable. And so we've got to be there. Those who have the flexibility with schedules, you can make contact with your legislator and ask them, you know, when is the Committee on Economic Development going to meet? When is the Finance Committee going to meet, the most important committee in the House and the Senate? And then build those relationships, because that's critical if we really want our community to be lifted up, if we want our businesses to get their fair share of the contracts. We have to be a part of the team.
Bill, let me ask you and Mary something, and then we're going to head out to the audience. I'm curious. I told the story about the guy who ran to chase after Bob, but I know both of you probably get a lot of, and I know, Bill, you do for sure, but I suspect you as well, Mary, get a lot of people who come to you, not only for advice, but who are looking for funding for different projects and the like. What do you see that is lacking, that causes you to either turn away or not take seriously what you're hearing from people?
Well, I would like to speak to you from the perspective of an entrepreneur, but more importantly, that of a female, African-American female in a white male-dominated industry. One of the things I see more often than not is we accept what they offer us. We are not aggressive enough with our own voices, letting them know. And I'll give you an example. All of you business owners out here, you know that DBE, MBE, all those acronyms, if you're waiting for those to work for you, forget it. However, there are ways that you can make it work for you. And let's talk about those strategic alliance partnerships. Back in the day, Bill, and you know, people are coming to you, women of color and minorities, wanting you to be on their team because they need to make a certain number. Well, that was fine when we were building the company, but we're experts now. We're selling the same things they're selling. So why accept a subcontracting opportunity instead of you sometimes stepping up to the plate and being the prime? One of the things I hear all the time is, well, we can't afford the bonding that's required on the project. Well, if you are a minority or a female and an expert, go find yourself a partner who can bond that job, and you take credit for having bonded that whole project. But we tend to step back too often and not use the power, the resources, and the expertise in certain industries. We allow people to take for granted that we can't do any better. Don't be afraid. Step up, be heard, be intentional, and make sure when you're bringing a deal to the table, you take charge of that deal. They are your partner, you're not theirs.
Isn't fear one of the, if not the greatest handicapper of our community, I think?
Fear is, and it's because as a culture of people, we've been trained to think of ourselves beneath everyone else that comes to our country. Once you overcome that fear, well, first you've got to discover what you're afraid of. Know what the fear, what is the derivative, and address that. I was afraid because I was shy, believe that. And once I identified that it was shyness that was crippling me, I addressed the shyness and realized that I was a pretty bold chick, one that enabled me to write the book, The Chick in Charge. And that's what I would challenge you to do as well. Find out, learn your weaknesses as well as your strengths, because, if you work on those weaknesses, you can transition them, and they can also become opportunities for you.
Well, I want to do a hashtag for a moment. And someone said earlier, I want to leave you with one thing that I think is important. Don't you ever believe that black folks don't have money. Don't you ever believe that we're broke. You should understand that we oftentimes spend our money on things that don't matter to anyone but us. And if you don't believe it, go home and tell your family you have a great opportunity to buy a whatever, say a Chick-fil-A. And they say, we don't got no money. We don't have no money. We're gonna pray for you, but we have no money. Now, I know this is not in your family, but it happened in my family, Thanksgiving 1969. It was just McDonald's. 2 months later, my cousin, Lil Man, got put in jail. These black women, primarily, my aunt and sisters and mother, they raised $10,000 cash to get Big Man out of jail. And I was in Columbus trying to hustle up $10,000 to buy McDonald's. So do not accept that we don't have money. You have to find the ways and means to get into the cycle of our community to get it out. One thing I want to say about people coming to invest, asking you to help them. First of all, I'm a social worker, and unfortunately, I'm still that. So I would never tell a person what they cannot do. But I will tell them quickly, I don't bet on the horse, I bet on the jockey. So if you come to me and tell me you got 5 Chick-fil-A's lined up, but you then tell me you're gonna get somebody to run them while you relax at the Ohio State-Michigan game, and you're gonna buy you a Cadillac and a Rolls Royce, I'm not betting on that. It's the person and how hungry they are. How bad do they want it? Are they prepared to grind like we all had to grind? I bet on the horse, never. I'll bet on the jockey 99% of the time. Besides, the horse will eat hay and weeds. The jockey won't filet mignon. He want to go to a Ohio State football game, So I believe in the person. How bad do they want it? That's what decides for me.
Mr. Davis, let me ask you lastly, before we go to the audience, something that I think is interesting in that we just heard the announcement of Ken Chenault stepping away. And you have stood in some tall corporate cotton, if I may. When we look at African Americans in corporate America, and we look at the decline of African Americans in corporate America, not just at that apex, but down the mountain as well. What does that tell us, and what should we read into those tea leaves?
I wish I had the answer. I was talking about this with somebody the other day, and I think the thing that's even more alarming is the decline in African American females in corporate America. Ursula Burns was, leading the way, and now she stepped away, and so who's coming behind her? I'll start out first of all. What's happening in corporate America is there's such a focus on quarter to quarter. Most of us, my age and somewhere around that age, when you got out of college, you went into some kind of a training program. Nowadays, most places don't have training programs. It's jump right in, it's make things happen. So unfortunately, a lot of organizations have walked away from some of the great training, whether it was bank training or going into hospitals or whatever. There isn't that investment that's being made. So what we have to do is we have to figure out how to make that investment on our own. We can't wait, like you said, for someone to come us along and tap on our shoulders and say, oh, I'm going to put you in this program. You should ask for whatever it is you're looking for. And I'll tell you, I'm going to put one of my friends on the spot. Where's Harvey? There's Harvey. His wife was telling me about when he would go in at the end of the year for his performance evaluation, and the boss is probably thinking 3 or 5%. Harvey would start at 8. He'd wind up with that 5 or 6, right? It's because he set the expectation. We don't do that. Sometimes we're just happy to be there. We have to stop being happy just being there, and we have to start being dissatisfied with where we are. And then we also have to do what is necessary to get to the top, which may mean taking some chances. And I always tell brothers and sisters who call me up and say, Steve, you know, this isn't going well in my career. And I'll ask them, I said, well, have you talked to headhunters or have you called other companies? And what do you think typically the answer is? No. Now, if you ask their counterpart how many interviews that they've been on like the last 90 days, it would surprise you. What's the difference? Is it that the opportunities aren't there? Or is it that we have a tendency to want to sometimes play it safe with our careers? So I hope that when my daughters start advancing through their career, they're still not bumping into glass ceilings. I mean, the glass ceiling should have been shattered a long time ago. I also heard a statistic the other day. The number of women on boards actually declined for the first year, which I'm scratching my head and saying, but you know what's starting to happen is the investment companies are now starting to challenge corporations and say, show me your diversity plan. So we should step out and say, where is your diversity plan? We can help you with that. We can help you get there.
Ma'am, real quickly. And I think we need to think really, really, really big. See, I think that there's an African American in this room and in this city that can start the next Google or Alphabet. And you think about opportunities. Opportunities come about as a result of disruption. Shouldn't we be working on artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles and the next Facebook? So when you think about value creation, I don't think we ought to think about being a millionaire or a multimillionaire, but a billionaire, because that next Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or whoever that is, I think that person looks like you and I. And I think we've got to dream that big. We've got to focus, work together. No successful person gets it done by themselves, and candidly, with some of my friends on stage, and pray a lot. Right? I want to acknowledge my faith in God.
The key to that, though, is finding out how to get into those businesses economically. Because what happens is startup money and the like can be a hindrance to us often. And what we find is we get into industries and we're on the back end of that industry. We lag on those industries. So while I agree with you, my question would be, how do we make sure that there are ways for us to make inroads to dollars that will allow that?
Well, part of what we don't do a good enough job of is providing opportunities for others. Those of us who are on boards, what do we do to make sure we're not the only one? And when a person like Ken Chenault, who I love and who's done a great job, but also you ask the question, how many brothers were being brought along to be his successor? And that's what happens. We need to take responsibility and to do a better job of providing opportunity for others and making sure that we're using these various positions to provide economic access to the benefits, not just tickets to football games.
And that's where I think the change in narrative comes, because I heard from the church, well, when you said that, but I also would turn that back around and say, but how many of us are doing the same thing? It's easy, as we were talking about, to say, well, Colin Kaepernick should do this, this, and this. Okay, great. Now, what are you doing to make a stance for justice and inequality? And would you really put your job on the line? It's easy to tell him what to do. So it's interesting to see that dynamic, because you don't have to be Ken Chenault only to bring those people behind you. So it's interesting. All right, we're going to open up to the audience. So if you will let us know, okay, make your way to the mic. Is that what you want? All right. So they're asking us now to make our way to the mic. Here's what I would ask you to do, because sometimes we've had people get in line. If it gets about 5 or 6 deep, which we've hit already, you don't have to necessarily run behind that. particularly if you're of a certain generation, because standing after a while gets tiresome for y'all.
I'll try to make this quick. Thank you all for the information you shared. I have a dilemma, and I'm going to ask you for some input if you can. With the climate that's going on globally, and everybody's talking about thinking globally, I have a 14-year-old, and I worry about him and his friends for later on. I mean, I'm really scared about it. And I see the group that is controlling things globally, it's about resources that they're controlling, really, to get all that 1%. But a lot of it's coming from our continent. And when we start thinking big, I don't see us planning on connecting back with ourselves to control those resources that the 1% is controlling. Like when you start talking about Rockefeller, Carnegie, all of them, J.P. Morgan, they controlled a lot of our resources. And I hear, Dwight, I agree with you with thinking big, but I'll say this quickly and then pass on. I remember the time when I was coming up, when Asian kids were walking with a little moxie about themselves because of the oil that's back in their homeland. And I don't see us with that moxie or sharing that with our kids. So we tell our child, here's my question, we're raising you to run the world, not run up and down the court or up and down the field. But to be honest, I don't know yet where those connections are to keep him with that mindset of thinking big about globally, because everybody else is.
Okay.
And if we don't, our kids are going to be in trouble. So that's a resource we have that I don't think we're using.
So let me just address that quickly, and then anybody who, on the panel. I think that African Americans romanticize our connection to Africa. A lot of us still think it's a country, right? And there's this sense of, when you talked about them walking with moxie because of what was at home, let's be honest, a lot of Africans don't see the kinship to us, and we don't see it to them beyond African art on our walls. So the first thing we have to do is find a true connection, right? And really start to understand one another, because there is a gap, a cultural gap, quite frankly. I've got a couple of friends, very good friends from Nigeria, and we talk about that all the time. So I think that's one of the things we do. But I think we also have to do what I've been saying, and that is that change the narrative. I've been hearing us talk about finding the riches of Africa for 20 years now. To your point, you're right, but I don't know how we, again, change the narrative, change our mindset. No. No, I hear you. But let me ask one of our panelists to respond. And Mr. Shumate, you deal with a lot of international business as well, and the company does. Talk to us about what he's suggesting there, if you will.
I think part of it is, again, that mindset in terms of there are a number of opportunities for young people to become engaged with international programs. And again, part of it's on us to provide those opportunities for them. Every student at Ohio State, as an example, is encouraged to have a global experience. We need to tell our children, take advantage of that, these high school programs, because you have to start building the blocks to get there. And there are opportunities, and you start young, but say to them, they can do it. I mean, one of the things, and I know because I've known you a long time, when we were coming along, our parents, our relatives, gave us a positive mindset to say we can do it. You can become engaged internationally, take advantage of these opportunities, but also, again, we need to provide opportunities for others who are coming along behind us, and that's something that we're not doing as effectively as we should.
But I think you're so right about resources and controlling the resource and really controlling your world. And I want to talk to you once we're through here about controlling our images. Because when you think about media, right, there's a reason that the big boys keep media companies and keep imagery. And what I'm trying to convince us of is that we need to start owning our stories and putting out our images on our own. So, yes.
Thank you. First of all, topic is excellent. I'm Donald Anthony. Topic is excellent, and I think it's a great panel. Ed, I want to build on what you said initially from the standpoint of 1% of the majority population controls more wealth than all of the African Americans combined. What do you, first of all, we know to one of you, I think, just said there are a lot of African Americans with wealth. How do we get the African Americans with wealth to do what Steve was talking about, collaborating? And are they already doing it? And if they're not doing it, what is it going to take for that to happen?
And can I just say, too, as you all are deciding who's going to answer this, I think that we need to also define wealth, right? I think that's important, too, because we say there are a lot of African Americans with wealth, and I said, well, then that depends on who we juxtapose us to. Well, yeah, all right, well, you find a lot of us with that, but okay. So,
I go back to the comment I made 20 minutes ago about there's money in our community. This is not personal, but it's what happened a couple of weeks ago. I have an interest in hotels. So Marriott has a program to help minorities and women become hotel owners. We go to the meeting in Bethesda, Maryland, 2 weeks ago, Wednesday, Thursday, and just happened to have an opportunity in Baltimore, near the Baltimore airport. And they said it requires $12 million. And there were about 12 or 15 people in the room. But of course, you always have a few women here and a few men there. But luckily, 4 or 5 of us kind of felt good about each other. A couple guys were from Florida, a couple guys were doctors. We raised $12 million among 7 people quickly. So I think there's a lot more going on in our community than we recognize. Now, this is my personal opinion. I don't need everybody to know what I got, especially white folks. And black folks aren't far behind that. But I can control black folks. I can't control white folks. So I think there's a lot going on quietly in our own way. I think Brother Smith made reference to some things. So I don't buy into the notion that capital is one of our main barriers. I buy into the notion that relationships is the main barrier.
I think we just have to open up and, like I said earlier, start talking about other things. I'll pick on Mr. Troy right here. He was telling us that his wife, he said in 30 days, is going to be launching her restaurant. Everybody in this room should be there, supporting her. And then get her to the point where she can open 10. And he will remember, and she will remember who was there early on. Because it's funny, see, when people are in the early going and they're struggling, you don't have a lot of people who want to be a part of that. But if you look at all these, if you talk to Mark Kwame at Drive Capital, who's doing venture capital right now, he's got a lot of ideas coming through. But what he told me he always looks for is, yes, I look for the idea, but I also look for how hard somebody is willing to work and to go. And we all watch Shark Tank, right? How many times does somebody say, I don't know if your idea is that good, but I like you. I like your passion. That's important. But I keep going back to when folks launch, we need to be there. And then if she someday says, I'm ready to open up 10, Eric, remember who all came in when it comes time to getting investments, that's the way to go. It starts out small. We're always looking for those big ideas. Sometimes, remember, Ray Kroc started out with one McDonald's. And turned it into, and when you look at all of these chains, I've been in the restaurant industry, you go back to all of these chains, it all started with somebody with one idea and people getting behind it and people taking chances.
But I think what Bill said is interesting, because where I would disagree with him is I think that money and capital is a hindrance, but to your point, let me finish it. It is a hindrance, but to your point, you don't allow it to stop you. And there's the difference in whether it is a hindrance or not. It is absolutely a hindrance to us, even if it's just getting a loan or whatever. But to your point, Bill, it is where you are. I'm talking about the average brother.
I'm less than average.
You're not less than. But the point is, I think yours is, again, a story that you never allowed that to be a hindrance to stop you. You found ways to make it happen. And I think that's what we all have to start to do, to find ways to make it happen. Yes, sir.
Good evening.
It'll catch up with you.
Good evening. Oyama Garrison. You know, one of the great things about all your stories up there is people tend to see your success, but they don't always see your sacrifice. And I'm just curious if you could share an example with us of your sacrifice and how it's gotten you to where you are, because many of us can learn from that.
Can I put a plug in for my book?
You can put a plug in for your book.
Somewhere tonight, or I hope on Amazon.com, my book is entitled Millionaire Moves, and it's really a reflection of my life as an entrepreneur since I was 28. And there are 7 proven principles. 7. Number 6 is failure. Number 7 is faith. And like most people knew in this game, I had McDonald's and I got into automotive. I bought a company in bankruptcy. I turned it into a $50 million engine, and I got a big contract for $100 million. I didn't have the capital, I didn't have the people, I didn't have the plants, and I didn't have the process. I was within inches of bankruptcy. Failure, failure, failure. But because I'm Baptist, you know, and I don't call the names in the book, but this gentleman's from Detroit. 2 black men went to my bank and said, listen, this gentleman has done everything we ever asked him to do in our community. And our community has done everything to assist your bank. So we're telling you, he has 6 months to fix this. And the chairman said, I can't give you 6 months, but I can give him 3. My loan officer said, if you fix this in 3 months, it's a Harvard case study. So every time I see that white boy, I said, have you written the case study yet? But let me say this, son. Failure is never fatal, and success is never final. I want to go to Drake on you a little bit. Drake says, I love you as much in your failure as I did in your success. So I'm through with it. But at that moment in my life, it was rough. But today, I spent a lot of time talking to brothers and sisters who hit that brick wall. And if you stay in this game long enough, everybody hits the brick wall. But again, relationships. Somebody to talk with, someone to pray with, someone to curse with, and to have people in your community that will stand up and say, this person is a great servant of our community, and you must cooperate with us to fix it.
And isn't that, let me throw this out to everyone on the panel, you can do it with a simple nod though, but isn't what Bill suggested really even greater than the sense of trying to find capital is relationships? At the end of the day, I think that's what we often miss, the idea that it is the relationship that can take you higher than the capital. Because you can falter on capital even if you get it, but if you have the right relationships and guidance and the like, you're better suited to become successful.
And I would like to, if I may, elaborate on that just for a second. I was a partner in my first security firm, and I walked out. After building the company to $4 million, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I had people counting on me to come back. And my industry is regulated, it's licensed. I left in December, but I couldn't take my test until March. There was a gentleman that someone I knew had a security agency license. He had never used it. That's how God works behind the scene on our behalf, according to the plan. He knew my story. They were doing something together one day, and he says, well, you know, I know this lady, and she's been in security all these years, but she got mad at her partner and left, and we don't know what she's gonna do. Do you know anyone who has a security company that's maybe a shell? The guy says, yes, I do. Never met the guy before. But I had an excellent relationship with a mutual friend of ours. So, you know, walking away was a huge sacrifice. And when I did it without a plan. So I didn't know. I'd sacrificed a $4 million company, going through the holidays, didn't know. But on the 29th of January, less than 30 days later, All-in-One Security was birthed. And it was all because of relationships. And when I then called on those clients, you know what they said? Had you not started another company, you were not the Mary Parker we thought you were. So relationships are huge, and you don't want to let them down.
And I would add one word to relationships, which is trust, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at an opportunity, you want to trust that person. They're brilliant. Bet on the jockey, not on the horse.
That's right.
Because at the end of the day, you're going to be asked to write a check and lay your money next to someone else's. So it is great to have the relationship, but I always ask, do I trust you? Will you work hard? Will you work harder than I will on this? And will you own it? And if it's a great idea, then you just do it. But I think the most important thing about relationships is, can I trust you? And I don't think there's anyone in this room that wouldn't invest time, money, or talent in a relationship which was trusted, where you could create a win-win, not only for you and I, but for our community.
And I think that all of us need to realize that your dream is your dream. It's not someone else's dream. Too often we get mad because somebody doesn't buy into our dream. And then that will stop you sometimes because that anger stops you. You can't figure out why they can't see that you're as brilliant as you believe. But they're off with their dream. And so you're lucky if someone comes on board with you. But you've got to figure out how to make your dream come to fruition and not be mad if others don't buy into it. So I think that's one of the things that stops us. I hear a lot of kids in my industry, you know, I just want to be on TV, and but they wouldn't hire me. They wouldn't, you know, not their dream, man. Your dream is to be on TV. Get on TV. Figure it out. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I want to say thank you to Brother Shoemate and Sister Parker for forcing me up to this mic tonight. I don't normally find myself in these rooms. I'm a 10-year high school history teacher, and so this conversation is just never one that I'm typically a part of. However, there were two things that were mentioned. One was mindset, and the second was about being bold and jumping out there. So I'm jumping out there. I don't have the next Google on my mind. That's not what God gave for me to do. And I promise I didn't plant the question about Africa or the connection that we have, but this is what I do have. In 2010, I organized my first trip for my high school students, 7 black high school students, to go to West Africa for 10 days so that they can completely reimagine what was possible for them. I thought I took them over there to study history and reimagine who they were in history. But what they came back with was observing that everybody, from the president on down to the person that was selling oranges on the corner, was black, and they owned what they did. I had the vision, just as our Jewish brothers and sisters have with Project Birthright, that every black high school student in the United States of America deserves the opportunity to go back and make that connection for themselves so that they can completely reimagine what's possible for them back here. My question to you is that obviously that's a mighty undertaking. I've organized 3 trips of youth, 3 trips of adults. One of the major things that's lacking is folk believing that it's worth investing the expensive cost of taking poor, not just middle class or upper middle class, black students to Africa for 10 days. So my question is about access for social entrepreneurs who are here, who are looking to have that next big idea, to change that mindset, to create the folk who would develop that wealth. It's not me, but I want to develop that within young folk. So I'm interested in what you all would have to say about that. I should add, I left the classroom to do this work full time. So I did take that step out on faith, and that's what made me come up and ask this question tonight.
Well, first of all, I want to applaud you. West Africa is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and it's because of the kindred spirit there. Like yourself, through my foundation, we're not just doing an educational sponsorship as usual, we're offering alternatives as well. And it is also my desire that every African American, period, would go back and visit Africa. It changes, and you would, those of you who've been, it changes your whole perspectives of who we are really. And so I'd like to have some conversation with you after we're done here.
Quickly about an organization I was associated with in Dallas, Texas. There was a gentleman who got very disillusioned when he was sitting at a lunch table with some other teachers, and one of the teachers said, "The reason I teach is so I can have 3 months off during the year." And he was ready to quit teaching. But then he realized that was not the right thing to do. And what he decided to do is, he was teaching in South Dallas, which is some pretty rough territories. So he decided to create something called the Turner 12. He said, I'm going to take 12 youth out of the projects in South Dallas. Average graduation rate out of that project was 10%. And he said, I'm going to get these kids in 7th and 8th grade, and when we're done, all 12 of them are going to go to college. Now, when I met him, I met him, our kids were going to the same school, and he was telling me about this program. I said, it's great. And he says, oh, I need a board of directors. And he asked me, would I be on his board? And I said, who else is on the board? And he said, you're the first one. It starts with one. First of all, it started with him stepping out in faith. The second thing is then he went around and just one by one, he found a grant writer. He found a retired school superintendent. I mean, he just put together this board that was incredible. And then he found somebody who was a venture capitalist who had done well and just liked him. And so he put this consortium together, and then that was the mission that drove. Now, this is the better part of 5 or 6 years. But it was basically him stepping out in faith because he believed in the idea. So my challenge back to you is if you really believe this idea, and you were talking about not having a plan, hey, I can make all this money, but put together a plan. And in Columbus, Columbus is known as one of the most philanthropic cities in its class in America. So if you're going to be successful at this idea, this will be the place to try it. If it doesn't work, you can keep doing what you're doing. But I would challenge you to write a business plan and then go look for a board of directors and some support, and you might be surprised at what happens.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say, in identifying those nonprofits, look for those who support the cause that you're creating.
Awesome. Good evening. My name is Kevin Lloyd. I am the co-founder of ColumbusBlack.com, as well as a new tech startup called Mile, which stands for Make Your Life Entertaining. The white is quite familiar. It's a social activity and entertainment app that's designed to curate events for you and actually truly make your life entertaining anywhere that you travel in the world by customized content being pushed to you instead of you having to search for it. But I don't say that just for you guys to know about it. I say that because this conversation to me is extremely exciting. I was blessed to be in town tonight because I just got back in last night. I fly back out tomorrow. In the audience or the panel that we have here, you all are speaking my language. I'm gonna tell you why. I recently became a director of Black Hack here in Columbus, which started a little over a year ago. And what we're doing is we're working on building an ecosystem to help close that gap that currently exists when it comes to access to capital for minorities that are typically entrepreneurs that are looking for funding. Those that don't know the stats, less than 1% of African-American companies or startups are VC funded, and less than 0.2% of African-American or black female companies are VC funded. There's a huge disparity. And when we talk about creating our own, it's become very, very clear to me as I've worked toward either gaining capital or being in a space around other entrepreneurs or even people who own startups or VCs, that there's an implicit bias that's out there, and we have to learn to create our own to help us get where we need to be. And it doesn't mean a handout, right? It means how do I help, but at the same time, how do I gain and benefit? So versus a question, well, I actually do have a question, but
okay,
what I wanted to do is...
we got to get to that, though.
My apologies, all right.
Okay.
So the offer was to the group that's here is if you're interested in an opportunity to meet with innovative entrepreneurs, I have that access for you all if you want to generate more capital. The question goes back to what Ed spoke about earlier is, what's the next step to actually help close the gap? Because at the end of the day, there is a gap there, and people don't have access to even this discussion on a daily basis who need to.
Thanks.
I'd like to just share that I think we have to show our communities that we're willing to come together as entrepreneurs and those who want to see our businesses grow and more businesses being started. Every other population that I know of invests in their own first. They invest in the communities that they live in, and they do for their people first without apology. We are the only people that I know of that wants to do for everyone else except for us as a whole, not the individuals on this stage and many of the people in the audience. But we have to believe that we have the same or better skills and knowledge. We have the wherewithal to build businesses and that we have to love ourselves, and if we love ourselves, we love our people. But if you don't love yourself first, you can't love your people. And I believe if you don't love your people, you can't love anyone else. So we've got to believe in our community and the skills and talents and expertise, and then build those collaborations with each other. It's not excluding those relationships that we have with Caucasians or Latinos or Jewish people, but it is also looking first at our own community and the strengths and talents of our own community.
So how do we do that in a way that is satisfying to both ends, right? So if you say that to a group of people, let's say 100 people in a room, they'll agree with you, they'll say amen, and then they'll be disappointed with you at the end of the day because 80 of those people will want to deal with you guys after this seminar, and maybe one, maybe two of them will, and they'll feel a false sense of what you were preaching from the stage without realizing that, look, half of you weren't ready, I can't deal but with X number. So how do we try to make the pieces fit, so to speak, that we can forge relationships with more than just the mentees that we have because it's your daughter's friend? Or how do we spread that?
So sometimes when you're approached for funding, a legitimate answer is no, right? And no doesn't always mean no. Sometimes no means not right now. You're not ready. And I can't tell you how many times I've been approached and people walk away disappointed. And the answer is you've got to have a plan, right? You've got to be able to execute, and you need a little more of a track record. So sometimes the best answer someone looking for funding can get is no, not yet. Then the question will be, I will help you in that journey. The other challenge that we have is, do we invest in funds? And I'll use a firm, Stonehenge. We're familiar with Stonehenge. Do we invest in funds that are existing that are not African American oriented, or do we create our own? And I seem to be involved in discussions daily about that. I think some others on the stage are also. And I think the answer, it's not an either or. It's a both. It's a both. I think we need to be more focused on us. But I think we also ought to look for those opportunities because there are some legitimate PE firms out there that we ought to be buying into and participating in those exits. Which, oh, by the way, when you're in those funds, you get to sit on the board of directors and all those other things which bring additional experiences to our family. I'm calling us all family.
And some of it is knowing your audience. If I know that Bill Picard is a conservative investor, then there's no real need for me to take him something that is kind of one of those wild investments that may make him a lot of money, but the chances are slim. So we've got to kind of match up too with who we walk to and ask for. Just because someone has money or has connection or has capability, that puzzle piece may not fit, and no need to get mad. You just need to find that correct puzzle piece. Yes, sir.
Okay, good evening. I want to thank all of you all for your comments. It propelled me to get up here and make a talk, and also to shamefully plug an organization that I belong to and help young people, young professionals, do education of young people through, in the realm of financial management, but we use the game of chess to teach them how to manage their money, manage their time, and so forth. And so I just wanted to let you all know that's going on. We're in our second month of nonprofit organization, and we hope and will grow to go beyond Columbus neighborhoods and into the surrounding areas, and maybe internationally one day. We have large dreams. I'm inspired by the young professionals that I'm working with and their passion to deliver this message to young people. We're starting with students anywhere from the 7th to the 12th grade, and we're teaching them on a bi-weekly, on a weekly lesson plan. My question, though, actually is to the panel: how early is it that we should start teaching children.
Somebody said prenatal.
Children about financial management and wealth building.
Yeah, it's never too early. One of the things that I wanted to just mention that I think is effective is to encourage everyone here to form a support group. Because a lot of times you want to come up and deal with, you know, we've all been at it for 40, 50 years. We didn't get here overnight, as the brother was saying, a lot of sacrifice. But look at your peers and form a support group and build that relationship you were talking about, and start small and be successful, because success begets success. And so, like, we don't talk about it much, but, you know, Dwight and my other friend, Kurt Moody, and I, we've been friends for years, but it was just 5 years ago, based on that relationship, based on the support group that we had, that we formed a real estate development company, all right? But it takes time, but get with people that are similarly situated, who have similar values, work together starting now, and build upon it.
And it is never too early. When you start making choices, is the time to teach. So a child could be 2 or 3 years old. Do you want this or do you want that? And you start to think about instant gratification versus wiser decisions. So when you get to an age that you can make decisions and choices, that's when the teaching ought to begin, at the very latest.
And teaching also goes from what they see. You know, not just telling them, but what they see in that household. My daughter is going out with Steve Harvey's son. I told her, hey, look, don't get used to that, man, because that's a whole nother realm. And I was serious about that. I said to her, if you get too used to that and then you all break up, that's a whole nother, I mean, you've experienced a lot of high with Steve and his family. And Steve and I have been friends, but I said it jokingly, but I also sat her down later to be really honest with her about what she's able to see and the expectation to go forward. You know, that's our 1%. Steve is our 1%. And you've got to start teaching them beyond just the bank account and the 1, 2, 3s. There are a lot of lessons when it comes to dollars, particularly for our young people who have lived with nothing else but self-indulgence, our fault, bling, our fault, priority, what they buy. We talked about athletic, our fault. So if we don't start teaching those expectations, I mean, think about it. We were told, you want those gym shoes? Okay, you got to save for them. Now we go out and buy it for them. It's a different world these kids grow up in, and a lot of that is on us. Okay, final question.
I want to make sure we get this point across, because we keep talking about bridging the gap, and we'll get to your question in a second, but we should start having a conversation around the core four, what I call the core four. And that's having a financial planner, a tax accountant, a risk management person, otherwise known as an insurance agent, but I want to talk about risk management, and then an estate planner. How many of your kids know what those 4 positions are? Okay. How many times have you involved them in your discussions? What did our parents a lot of times say to us? Don't ask a lot of questions, don't spread your business, all that kind of stuff. That mindset's got to go. As soon as your children start managing money or go away to college, don't give them a credit card, give them a what? A debit card. Because that teaches them that someday you may not make enough money to fulfill all your vices. But those 4 individuals, if you don't have them, and I hope that this is something you can pass on to your children, because that's what I'm trying to do now. My daughter and her husband, they're using the same financial planner. They're using the same tax person. And I'm not bragging, I'm just saying, my parents didn't know to do that. But being in corporate America, I got a chance to ask executives, how do you do this? Oh, you need a tax planner, you need a financial planner, you need this, you need that. My parents didn't teach me that. My parents, just like all people on the stage, they gave us great values, but they didn't teach us what the 1% knows. And if you can start now putting that in their head, when they start making their money, they'll start making the right decisions as you're describing.
And Steve, we should say, we said this before, the idea of sometimes people walk away when you say estate planning because they think of the Beverly Hillbillies and estate. But it really is really just about your home. You know, you don't have to have a true quote-unquote palatial estate, but you ought to know what your house is about and how to best maximize money out of that. So sometimes the verbiage we use gets lost in that. Okay, yes.
Okay, so my name is Danya Lewis with Danya's Florals, and I'm going to be the butterfly in the buttermilk, if that's okay with everybody. So I think you all are amazing, and actually I interviewed with you, Ms. Tavares, when I was an intern at OSU. So I have to read from my notes because I don't want to miss anything. So according to Federal Reserve data, according to many major economists like Sandy Darity, Derek Hamilton, Thomas Piketty, white families have nearly 10 times the net worth of black families, and the gap is growing. When you look at wealth structures, all the races, there's a normal curve, right? But when you look at, I try not to say right too often, but when you look at the African American race, there is no curve. It's virtually flat. So people like you guys in this room, people like you on the panel, you're actually cut off. Economists actually cut you off because you're way up here, and then they cut off the lowest of the low. But everybody in the middle, it's pretty much flat. According to the Washington Post, you guys have, we're worth $1,700. So there is virtually not very much wealth in the African American community, and wealth is a team sport, right? So wealth truly is a team sport. So I have 3 quick questions. Do we have an economics problem, or do we have a political problem? My next question is the term diversity and inclusion helping the African American community, or is it somewhat of a hindrance? Do we get some kind of way, lost in the term diversity? And then my final question is, how do we address the prison industrial complex problem in our country? Thank you.
Okay, child.
I'm going to start. I'm just going to start.
Going on there, girl.
You asked some really big questions and some tough questions for this panel. I'm going to go with the diversity and inclusion topic because it's an area that I spent a lot of time with as the director of the Multi-Ethnic Advocates for Cultural Competence. I do believe diversity and inclusion is leaving us out because the diversity and the inclusion that has taken the forefront is the LGBTQ community. Not that it's wrong, but that we're getting lost. We're getting lost in that discussion, and we're getting lost, not our African LGBTQ community, because they're lost in that discussion as well. But we're getting lost because we're not pushing wherever we are that we need the same kind of diversity of our people in the contracting, in the business development, in the community development. It goes to the newer groups, and they are sticking together. They're pushing their agenda for their people. It goes back to what I said earlier. If we're not pushing the issue, if we don't love our people enough to raise the issues wherever we are, on a board, on a corporate board, a nonprofit board, in a business, that we have to lift up our people, provide those opportunities, not only for employment, but for contracts for our community, then what are we doing for our people? So for me, yes, we are getting lost in the discussion because it's putting everybody in that bucket and adding more to the bucket. Because I had the fight in the General Assembly on the issue of disparities. Now, we all know, no matter what the topic area is, we have the greatest disparities on the negative end. And I was fighting for infants, our infant mortality here in the state of Ohio, 3 times the rate of Caucasian babies. And I was pushing to address the disparities of African American babies. Well, my Caucasian colleagues on the Finance Committee wanted to include Appalachian families and babies. Well, their mothers are not dying Their babies are not dying at the same rate as our babies. And I had to make a conscious decision of whether or not I was going to fight just for our babies or to include others with disparate conditions. In order to get the money for our babies, I included those with other disparate conditions. But it goes to the point, if we don't push it, our community will be left behind. So I agree that diversity and inclusion has left us out of the forefront of that discussion.
I would take the easy question. You said, do we have a political or an economic challenge? Yes, and yes, right? And so the question then becomes, what are we going to do about it? Because we will never stand down, right? We will never give up. But I think it starts with acknowledging I am X years old. I'm not going to say what the X is, but I have never seen a political environment like I see today, and I'm not making a political statement, but for people of color, it feels like there's an all-out war, right? And that includes economics. How do we hold you down? How do we disenfranchise a people, right? So let's acknowledge that it exists, and then let's get up every day and go fight the battle that needs to be fought. Not only for the people in this room, but for our children and their children. But the answer is yes and yes.
So let me say this, as they're telling me we've got to close out. I'm going to take moderator privilege here and skip your industrial prison question, because that's a whole nother. But I will say this, and then I'm going to ask each one of the group just to give you a walk-away nugget. But I will say this to your 2 points. I agree. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. We do have an economic and political problem. And as far as diversity and inclusion, I've been doing this for 30 years, been doing stories on blacks in corporate America for 30 years. I've been doing, the question of diversity. And I say just take a look at the NFL. You talk about diversity and inclusion. And here's the point that I think we have missed, because we keep trying to force them to. Diversity and inclusion stops when you own it, because then you can include yourself and anybody else you want to. We keep trying to force them to include us. And sure, it should be fair, and sure, it should be equitable, and sure, it should be based on merit, but I'm not sure life has ever been like that. And so I want us to look at the narrative we're looking at for the last 30, 40 years and say to ourselves, we should still fight for that, but the real inclusion and diversity should come from ownership and our ownership, so we don't have to ask them, please include us. Please make your workforce diverse. We have to start, as we said at the very beginning, thinking differently. Mary, I think you said that, thinking differently, changing that narrative. So I'll ask each one of our panelists to give us a nugget to kind of walk away with, but I want to say that books will be on sale outside. Dr. Picard's Millionaire Moves, 7 Proven Principles. You don't even have to go to Amazon. The author will be there, and Mary will have her books as well. So that will be outside, is that right? Outside. So when you go outside the doors, we'll see how much support y'all got for the black community tonight. There you go. All right, so I'll just start on this end and go down. Just a nugget, a walk-away nugget, if you will.
I know a lot of things we talked about are some very complex issues, but what we need to continue to do is focus on the next generation and generations. And when you talk about wealth creation, I mean, and I'll give you, something simple when I was talking about estate planning and all that. It's not all that fancy. How many of you have grandchildren? Okay, how many of you have 529 accounts set up for your grandchildren? Okay, great. Now, here's another little thing I learned. I thought you had to wait for your grandchildren to be born. You don't. You can take your children, assign a 529 account, and then they can become the beneficiary. Start that now and think about where the stock market was 20 years ago and where it is now.
2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago. But just think 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Start early and start often. I'm very blessed to have a spouse that believed in that, and that's the other thing that has to be a part of this. This has to be a family plan. Everybody has to live by it. We all know we have vices. There's that purse we like or that car we like or something like that. It's got to be equal sacrifice, but you're really not sacrificing. You're setting up the next couple of generations. So when I went to business school, quick story. I was talking to a friend of mine, he didn't have a job, and I said, hey, what are you going to, you don't have a job, what are you going to do? And he said, well, Steve, tap into my trust funds, of course. Okay, most of us, the 20 African Americans there, didn't have a trust fund. But I can almost guarantee you now, the 20 of us will have trust funds for our children. And it doesn't have to be big. Start out small, start out early, and have faith and invest in things other than your banks. No disrespect to the banks. Banks, investment vehicles, diversified portfolio will get you there.
Let's continue the conversation. And one of the things that you were suggesting is we need an action plan. So let me suggest that if the Who's Who would take the lead, that they pick 5 people in the audience and pair them with each one of us for a follow-up conversation so that it's not just about this gathering, but we're going to do something to have an action plan with them and to really get beneath it and share. So let's make a commitment to have a follow-up.
Excellent.
It'll catch you. It'll catch up.
Absolutely. I'm in agreement with that 100%. The other thing that I would like to add here is don't stop because of where you are. You're here now. But as long as you're living, there's still other places that you must travel. And the other thing is, and we talked about doing business with African Americans. I love the word intentional. Be intentional about doing business with each other and bringing your businesses together and go after major contracts as a team. You can do it.
You can do this. You can do this. No excuses.
I say first, follow your passion. Secondly, start where you are and build from there. Don't feel like you have to jump 10 steps today. You start where you are and build from there.
And always be curious. And remember that none of us get where we go by ourselves. And, you know, and again, I spoke of faith earlier, and I know the faith of many of the folks here. I will never come and leave a stage without thanking the Lord. The other thing is, there are 3 beautiful women. You wish you would have done this, but I'd like Renee, Linda, and Renee to stand. Our spouses, please. And I'd like to acknowledge our wonderful, beautiful spouses, because we wouldn't be sitting here without them. So, and I think I'll just close on that.
Yeah, that's a good spot to close, brother. Yeah, really. That's a good spot. Let us give a collective thanks to this panel, please. So let me, before we leave, we just want to bring Dr. Carter D. Womack, Chief Operating Officer of Who's Who, to the stage for some final remarks.
Good evening. Good evening. Let's give our panel and our host another round of applause. On behalf of Who's Who's Publishing and Real Times Media, we really want to take an opportunity to thank you, our friends, our guests, for joining us this evening for a lively conversation. I want to take an opportunity to once again thank John Page and his staff here at the Convention Center to host us. John is probably one of 10 African Americans in the country who run major convention centers of this size. And John has opened this facility up for us in the community to engage, to give jobs and employment. I want to also thank some other business partners that helped support us this evening, the Hyatt Regency and the Hilton Hotel for the accommodations for our guests. Danya, our Who's Who official florist, the one with the 3 questions. We adopted her last year, so she provided floral arrangements for the registration. So we always want to encourage entrepreneurship. So last year, Who's Who in Black Columbus adopted Danya as our official florist, and we promote her around the country. And we want everybody here, if you need flowers, see a sister who's in business. So on behalf of Hiram Jackson and the Who's Who's publishing team, we want to say thank you. Alex, you gave us a charge, and we're taking the charge. So for anyone who's interested in pairing up with any of these phenomenal 6, because he volunteered everybody when he said that, and everybody said what? Amen. Did y'all say amen? I'm a Baptist. So you can sign up outside at one of the tables, give your name, email address, and phone number, and who you would like to connect with, and we'll make that happen and plan a follow-up. May God continue to bless each and every one of you as you leave this evening, and may continue blessings to all of you. We want panelists, we want to stay for some photos.
Come down there. Thank you. Great questions. Great mind.